This is my life. Who would ever think I'd consider being a dad? Perhaps Dad always loved her and Mom, yet she felt it was never enough. Annie, arriving at the dance, overheard men mocking her age. She really felt like a little girl, yet her mind was still on kids. Annie's self-esteem took a hit, so to distract herself, she noticed a guy staring at her and mustered the courage to chat him up, only to find out he was a fishing cop, thinking Annie was trying to pick him up. He took her to jail. For the first time after the divorce, Annie called her ex for help, only to find him flirting with another woman on the line. She didn't say a word, and fully gave up on any hopes for her ex. If this had happened to an ordinary woman, she would have lost it by. Still, Annie was tough. She eventually asked her neighbor for help. He was just a working guy, nothing like the single high society type she had been dreaming of. But he was the only real connection Annie had had recently. They were too young, so nothing happened. Annie hugged him. Back home, she didn't tell her son about it, but George spilled the beans about last night to Annie. She called her father a jerk, but Annie wouldn't let her talk that way. She knew her ex might not be the best dad, but he definitely loved his son. She didn't want the conflict to affect the next generation, so she told George a story. At 3, George had an ear infection and cried non-stop. Finally, his grandpa walked in and played a tune on his horn, and George stopped crying. But as soon as George stopped, George burst into tears again, so for the next few days, she kept playing to him until he finally got better. George, young, didn't understand adult emotions' complexity. With some cash, Annie chose to avoid trouble. She chose to seek refuge with her sister. Sure, they had a huge fight before when Annie said she'd never return, but she didn't harbor it. At this time, her sister was the only one she could rely on. Annie's sister was tough-talking yet kind-hearted, caring for her and the kids but mocking Annie's vanity. Annie didn't want to freeload, so she sought a job. She wasn't arrogant as her ex claimed. She saw no job as inferior. Even if it meant being a waitress, she was up for it. But on her very first day, she ran into a little trouble. She didn't hold back and poured hot coffee straight into some guy's lap. Ever since the divorce, she had gone through a lot of awful stuff but had never cried see until now. Unsurprisingly, her first job went up in smoke, but she stayed optimistic and luckily landed a second job at a paint store her elegant taste and sales acumen boosted sales by 20. In 3 weeks. The boss, back from vacation, hadn't met her. He wanted to test if she was truly qualified for the job. Yet, upon meeting Annie, he was instantly taken in by her charm. Please advise about your hairdo. It'll mix the colors together and call it the Bill Massey, the Mr. Purple. Please advise about your eyes, Mr. Purple. Not only did Annie land a stable job, but she also gained a suitor. It wasn't long before the boss proposed to her. Annie shared this exciting news with her sister and kids, but her sister got drunk and started complaining. She had always envied Annie, thinking her success was all due to her pretty face. She envied Annie for marrying a rich husband and having 2 healthy sons, while her life was as dull as her own face. Like a stagnant pond. But Annie knew better. It wasn't like this at all. See, the different attitudes toward life led to vastly different. Annie was optimistic and strong, always ready to try, while her sister was bitter and sensitive, forever complaining. Subtitles: this was why she didn't want to stay with her sister. Luckily, the paint store owner was a kind, warm-hearted man. Her eldest son, Robbie, loved acting, so Annie took George and the boss to watch him perform, but the show was cancelled last minute due to bad weather. He must have been really upset, as he always joked about bringing the audience onto his street. He clapped for Robbie himself to help him finish the act, and then offered some solid man-to-man advice to a gloomy George. He told George that men and women were wired differently and tended to be temperamental, so he should always carry a jacket in case. He said that if he could comfort them when they were moody, it would prevent plenty of arguments. He never held back on complimenting Annie, boosting her. Just as Annie thought she was on the verge of starting a new life, a strange woman suddenly showed up. The woman, claiming to be the boss wife, gave Annie a large compensation and told her he had mental issues and was a marriage addict. Over the past 2 years, he had been engaged to at least 7 women, and Annie was just one of them. See, her dream of a happy life was quickly fading into a mirage. Before leaving, she asked Annie if she was in love with the boss. Annie denied it, but the woman insisted that all women loved her husband. Annie couldn't argue back. Subtitles: she got into the car with her husband and left, while her husband offered her the sincere yet inexpensive care that every woman would receive. After going through so much, Annie had completely given up on men. She decided to use the compensation to take Robbie to Hollywood to chase the dreams of stardom. But George wanted to stay with his aunt. He had adjusted to life there and found his dream, as his teacher praised his writing. Subtitle: so she wanted to be a writer. Annie accused her sister of driving a wedge between her and George, questioning why she kept him. But all this was George's own choice. He thought Annie didn't understand him and wasn't a responsible mother. Even the aunt who had only been with him for 2 months knew what books he liked. Yet Annie didn't know, resulting in an unprecedented fierce argument between mother and son, with no resolution in sight. In the end, Annie left, heartbroken, with Robbie. She always told her sons not to look in the rearview mirror or back, but at that moment, she couldn't help but glance back at the small figures in the mirror, until they vanished completely. George was also disheartened. He just wanted Annie to stay with him in solidarity. The tiny figure in the rearview mirror was a stark reminder, enough to drive Annie's feelings further down. George was really bummed. He felt Annie favoured his older brother way too much and wished she had chosen to stay once. He hoped Annie would choose him for once, but little did he know she'd leave with such finality. Since that day,